Every collector's path is different. Some of us hunt for the pristine, while others find beauty in the well-loved corners of a century-old card. Some of us collect what we know. Others dig deep into the research and the great hobby mysteries. But no matter the path, every journey starts in the same place, a love of the game. Welcome to the Love of the Game Auctions podcast. I'm your host, Crisafulli. On this show, we're going beyond the auction block to talk about the legends, the rarities, and the long-forgotten stories that make this hobby great. I'll be joined by guests who live and breathe sports, experts who help us see the hobby through a different lens. So if you value the lore as much as the score, you're in the right place. Let's go. Thanks for being here. I'm Crisafulli of Love of the Game Auctions. Today's episode starts with a story that reminds us how baseball has always been bigger than the game itself. In 1902, a black man named Billy Miller was playing for a town team in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, years after teams were segregated. What he accomplished on the field and in his life might surprise you. Later in the show, we'll be joined by someone who's seen the business, the media, and the heart of baseball up close, Rick Cerrone. He's done it all, from being the youngest national baseball editor to leading public relations for the New York Yankees during some of their most iconic seasons. But first, let's dive into the story of Billy Miller and his remarkable moment in history. Occasionally, a story comes along that's so compelling, even though it doesn't involve a well-known player, that it deserves to be told. And that's the case with Billy Miller. Back in 2018, we received a consignment of an ordinary-looking calendar featuring a photo of a baseball team from Honesdale, Pennsylvania. Olivia, if you would kindly bring that photo up, we can show everybody what it looked like. Pretty cool photo, pretty cool calendar, dates to 1903. I had done some work in a previous career in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, so this was interesting to me, and it made me take a closer look at the photo. There's a black player in the photo. He's in uniform. So naturally, I'm interested in this. Who is this person? Why is he on this team? How does he get to play when baseball was segregated by 1902? Well, after I dig into the newspaper research a little bit, I find out that his name is Billy Miller. He was a shortstop and a pitcher, and in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, Billy Miller was a hero. The newspapers wrote about his good nature and his unbelievable baseball ability. They liked him so much, they didn't even like to refer to him as a black player. They called him their colored white player. Other towns in the league, they didn't want him to play on the Honesdale team, not because he was black, but because he was great. In the town of Carbondale, there was a big controversy. The folks in Carbondale believed that Billy Miller wasn't from Honesdale and he didn't live in Honesdale, so he shouldn't be allowed to play in the league. They tried to get him kicked out. The Honesdale team denied it. They insisted he's from Honesdale. He owns a bootblack stand here in Honesdale. He lives here. It was such a big story that the Scranton Times wrote about it, and the Honesdale newspaper had to refute it. Their hero was from Honesdale. There was a big game between the Honesdale team and the Carbondale team, and it ended, and at the end of the game, the Carbondale fans chased the Honesdale team out of town. They threw rocks at Billy Miller. After a few years, Billy Miller went on to play in the Negro Leagues. It was reported in the newspapers that he did. They said that he went to play for the Cuban Giants. Well, there were a lot of different Negro Leagues, and there were a lot of different Cuban Giants and Cuban ex-Giants and things like that. It was reported in the newspaper, but I lost track of Billy Miller and wasn't able to find where he went after he left Honesdale. But we picked up the trail in New York, where he enlisted in the military. He must have been close to 40 years old at this point, and he joined the 369th Infantry, which was nicknamed the Harlem Hellfighters. This was an all-black regiment that spent more time on the front lines in World War I than any other military unit. Right at the end, Billy Miller lost an arm and a leg in an artillery attack. He survived. He came home. They had a big parade. Billy Miller lived out the rest of his life. He's buried today in Port Jervis, New York, which is where he was from. He was not from Honesdale. That's one of my favorite stories. And that is the story behind the sale. My guest today has lived nearly every side of baseball, from media to front office, from awards programs to the world's biggest franchise. Rick Cerrone, who we refer to in our office as Rick Cerrone, not that Rick Cerrone, has founded a national baseball magazine, become the youngest editor-in-chief of Baseball Digest, and guided public relations for the New York Yankees through 11 postseason appearances, 6 World Series, and 4 rings. Rick, it's great to have you on the program. Welcome.
Well, thanks, Al. It's great to be with you. That was a great story. It's a Baseball Digest kind of a story. We might kind of steal it there from you.
It's a good one, and that's what I love about baseball is it's filled with stories like that. Every town's got something like that, and you know, you don't have to look that far to find it.
You're right. And one thing about Baseball Digest, I think it's always been the case, but I think especially since I became its editor in chief in 2018, is that there's so many stories like that, and we want to tell them. We're doing a story in the upcoming issue that goes on sale May 1st, the May June issue, on a player that I don't. I'm sure I heard this, but I don't remember it, and it wasn't that long ago, 21 years ago, where a young man named Adam Greenberg got called up to the Cubs, got his first major league at bat in Miami, and steps into the batter's box. First pitch nails him in the head, uh, and that was it. His career was over. I mean, he played in the minors. He never got called up. He played in independent ball. And then somebody, a filmmaker, was watching Field of Dreams with his wife, who had never seen the movie, and the wife said, "Wow, that is a sad story about the Moonlight Graham." And he goes, "Well, if you think that's a sad story, I got a better one."
Huh.
And he decided at that point that he was going to start an online petition, and he did a YouTube video for Adam Greenberg to get him an at bat in the major leagues.
No
And he
kidding.
was successful because the Marlins bit, and the Marlins signed him to a one-day contract, and he got an at bat. I won't tell you anymore. But those are the kind of stories. I mean, these come up all the time in letters to the editor. Someone wrote for the next issue about this guy must be the only player to have this distinction. He had 2 home runs in his career, one in his first major league plate appearance and one in his last, and none in
Huh.
between. And I'm not going to tell you who it was or when it was, but we did find out that he's the only player in baseball history with that distinction. A
How
home
about
run
that?
in his first at bat and his first plate appearance and his last plate appearance and none in between. So you're right. That's the great thing about baseball.
Yeah. I grew up reading Baseball Digest and reading stories just like that. Little pieces of trivia that stuck with me for my whole life, and so it's and we'll get into this in a little bit, but it's very very cool to be involved with Baseball Digest. But let's talk about you for a little bit.
Okay.
Let's start at the beginning. Um, you were the youngest editor and publisher of a nationally distributed publication. Is that true?
It is. It's not really the beginning, though, because the beginning started in my high school guidance counselor's office the first week of my sophomore year. If my math is correct, I was not yet 15 years old.
Where'd you
Uh,
go to high school?
I went to Yorktown High School in Yorktown
Okay.
Heights, New York. And I was such a bad student my freshman year because I really couldn't adapt from a parochial school where you sat in the same desk all day. And when you
Uh-huh.
changed subjects, you just reached down under your desk and took out that book, to a public
Sure.
high school where you had football games and you had so many things going on. I could not focus on uh, my studies. I probably had ADD, which no one knew what that was. They just
Sure.
told me I didn't pay attention. So something happened the summer after my freshman year, while, by the way, I was taking 2 freshman year courses over again at a nearby high school just to become a sophomore because I had
Okay.
failed two classes, two subjects. Don't remember what they were, but that summer I read in the local paper that my guidance counselor, a man by the name of Richard Swales, was named principal. I never thought that little transaction that I read about, that little news item, would change the trajectory of my life,
Okay.
because obviously I was going to get a new guidance counselor, and I don't know how they divvied up the students of Mr. Swales to the other three or four guidance counselors,
Sure.
but I was given to a man named Forrest Buddy Dowds, who was also the football coach.
Okay.
Buddy Dowd's father was the first ever head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1933. So,
Okay. Wow.
that kind of resonated with me. Oh, Coach Dowd. So, first week of freshman to sophomore year, I'm sitting in his office and he's looking at what I call my rap sheet, my grades from freshman year. And he looks over to me and he says, "Let me ask you a question. If you could do anything you wanted, what are you doing in, let's say, 10 years?" And I know that at that moment, I'm thinking, whatever I answer him, I want to be a firefighter like my father. I want to be a sports writer. I want to be an airline pilot, whatever. He's going to say, well, that's a great career, but if that's what you want to do, you're going to need a high school diploma and you're not off to a very good start. But my
Right.
answer really blew him away, and he would tell you that today. He's 93 years old. I had lunch with him back in a couple of months ago in Boynton Beach, Florida, and he tells that he will not call me on the phone without starting with that story, because my answer to the question, what are you doing if you could do anything you want? What are you doing in, let's say, 10 years? And I said, that's easy, coach. I'm the public relations director of the New York Yankees.
How about
And
that?
he was taken aback and he said to me after a while, "Okay, I'll make you a deal. If you can get your grades up and keep them up, can you do for my football team what this PR director of the Yankees, Bob Fischel, does for the Yankees?" I'm like, "When do I start?" So I
Huh.
walked into that office as a disengaged, underachieving student, and I walked out with a job. I was the public relations director of the Yorktown Cornhuskers, and I took it very seriously. I mean, Al, we had a media guide. What high
Wow.
school football team? And as Coach Dowds told me recently, we never had one before you, and we never had one since. So I took it seriously, and then everything fell into place. I met a gentleman who covered local high school sports, who my
Sure.
senior year says, "Hey, it was nice knowing you. I'm moving to DeKalb, Illinois, to become the sports editor of the DeKalb Daily Chronicle." Okay, again, didn't register. Nice knowing you. Thanks for all you did for me. And then in January of 1972, as I was finishing up the last semester, I guess, of being a high school senior, he called me and he said, "You need to come out here and look at the college that's here in DeKalb, Northern Illinois University, because they've got an award-winning journalism department. They're now a Division I athletic program. You need to see this." So I went out there
Wow.
and I was treated like a king. I'm in the basketball offices with the players, and I'm at booster luncheons with Stan. Went to a basketball game where they had just beaten Indiana, number 5 ranked Indiana at home by 19 points. They
Wow.
were really, it was the all right. So I learned my trade there because
Huh.
in those days, Al, no college or maybe just Ohio University had a sports management program.
Right.
And every PR director that I knew at the time or knew of was a former sports writer. So the way in was to excel at journalism. So I wrote for the paper in the summers. I was the sports editor of the paper. Senior year, I did the football and basketball games on the radio. That was exactly 50 years ago. I was doing basketball at this time 50 years ago as we speak.
Huh.
And but I came back to Yorktown Heights with no job, and the Yankees weren't hiring anybody. So I had to get a job, and I got a job with a local newspaper writing features. And a man who was another man, like, if I don't meet this person, I'm painting bridges.
Uh-huh.
His name was Mike Arenstein. You probably know that name because
I
his son
know him
Andrew,
well, yeah.
a big part of Mike Arenstein might be the single most important figure in the industry of collectibles.
Uh-huh.
Because when I met Mike Arenstein to do a story on him for my student newspaper, because I'm the sports editor in the summer, one
Right.
problem is there's no sports going on. And
Sure.
we had in the summer, we had three editions a week, and I had to fill 2 pages in each of them. So I would find different features to write. And one was Mike Arenstein, who I learned was making baseball cards in his basement.
Sure.
Now,
Yeah.
to not compete with Topps, which had the license, he wasn't doing current players.
Right.
He would do a set of cards. Another ingenious thing about Mike, and I can't build him up enough, one of the most important people in my life, is that he didn't know it at the time, but he had the ingenious idea to buy up photo collections. And he was buying them up for like next to nothing.
Yeah.
He bought Ring Magazine's baseball photo files. So he had pictures, he had a dozen pictures of the shortstop on the 1927 Yankees. So his sets were like the 1927 Yankees, the 1941 Brooklyn Dodgers, the 51 Giants, and I did a story on them. So my senior year, I start getting this magazine in my mailbox at the University Plaza at NIU called Collectors Quarterly. And Mike had started a collector's magazine. And in the centerfold of the magazine were cards of current players to
Mhm.
promote the new 600 plus card set that he had just produced called SSPC
SSPC.
with
So
current
now
players.
I'm going to jump in just to bring everybody up to speed who's listening. Mike Arenstein is the MA in TCMA, which was the company that manufactured so many different card sets in the 70s and 80s, pioneered minor league cards, did just amazing stuff. And Mike's son is Andrew Arenstein, who is the operations manager at the Love of the Game auctions, and so this is how all of this kind of comes around full circle. So okay, go on.
So
It's
Mike's doing this magazine, which he's promoting in a flyer, and he's got, probably got 800 subscriptions, which he thinks is a disaster. And when I get home, he calls me up. I go over to meet him for coffee at his house. I can still picture it. And he says, I'm getting out of the publishing business because it didn't resonate, whatever. And I'm like, wait a second, how many flyers did you send out? And whatever number he said, I said, well, that's like a 20% return. That's astronomical.
right.
So he says, I'm done. He made a deal with Topps. Topps sued him. They settled, but he wanted to get out of Collectors Quarterly. So I'm thinking, oh, so he asked me, I need a favor. I'll give you $150, which was like saying I'll give you $15,000 in 1976.
Right.
My editor has gone off to college. His editor was a high school senior. That high school senior's name, by the way, was Keith Olbermann. So Keith goes off to college to Cornell, and Mike is left with the last issue.
Uh-huh.
That's his only liability to his subscribers, because even if you subscribed, you didn't get the current issue, you got all the issues.
Right. Sure.
So if he just sends them this issue, he's done. So
Right.
I told him I would do it, and he gives me this box of manuscript and photos and glue. And this is not the day of computers. You're not doing this online. You're getting it typeset, putting in
Sure.
headlines. So I did it, and I really enjoyed it.
Right.
I went to Mike and I said, Mike, you should keep this going. I think you got a good thing here. I said, no. I said, but here's the thing. It's got to be baseball quarterly, not collectors quarterly, because there's already 6 or 7 collectors magazines. There's
Sure.
only one magazine that comes out more than once a year, and that's Baseball Digest. And Baseball Digest is digest size. It's printed on newsprint. It's black and white. We can add color. Okay. So he says, all right, we'll give it a try. So in 1977, I was the editor of Baseball Quarterly.
Hmm.
And we did the first issue, which was all black and white. and it was a 50th anniversary of the 1927 Yankees. It was so long ago that next year is the 100th anniversary. So we did this and we got great reviews. And I remember we were having a conversation with someone, and Mike gave the gentleman a copy. And the gentleman said, "This is really nice. Can you get it on the newsstand?" And we both looked at each other, or he said, "It should be on the newsstand." And we both, Mike and I, looked at each other and said to ourselves, "How do we do that?
Right.
We don't know anything about the magazine business." So Mike said, "I got an uncle, Uncle Selig, who's in the magazine business. He was a wholesaler, which
Okay.
is like the local guy. So there's a national distributor that sends the magazines all over the country. So he sent every magazine that they had to Uncle Selig's wholesale warehouse, and it was a warehouse. And then he would farm it out to be, like 5 go to this newsstand, 10 go to this, whatever."
Right.
So
Right.
we met with Uncle Selig, who had, gruff guy with the apron on, and he looks it over. He says, "This is really nice. You need a national distributor." "Okay, how do we do that?" "I'll make a couple of calls." So he calls this company, Cable News, which was one of the
Uh-huh.
biggest magazine distributors in the country. And he sets up a lunch for me with these two gentlemen. I still remember their names, what they looked like: Frank Sermonero and Neil Leventhal. Their
Okay.
offices were at 777 3rd Avenue. And I went for my first ever business meeting.
Okay.
And I show up wearing a shirt like this. I thought, oh, my mother said, "You look very nice."
Yeah.
We have a meeting. They say, "Let's go to lunch." They take me across the street to a famous restaurant, Smith and Walensky's. And when the
Okay.
waiter or the maitre d' says, "Let me see at your table," he stops me. He says, "You got to put a jacket on." And he hands me a waiter's jacket. That's how long ago it was. You can walk
Wow.
into Smith and Walensky's in a golf shirt now.
Yeah.
So they said, "We'd like to test this. We need 10,000 copies," right? And which Mike was like, "10,000 copies? These are costing me $1 a piece. I can't spend $10,000." But the guy said, Frank or Neil said, "No, no, no. There's a plant whose office is on the 12th floor or something. I'll set you up with a meeting, right?" So with these with this printer, they print in Mississippi on web presses, not sheet fed presses. So it would be a lot less expensive. So I had this meeting with this gentleman at W.A. Krieger Printing, and Mike is like, "We're not doing this. We're not doing this. I don't have that kind of money." So he sent the cost estimate. It was 28 cents a copy. So it was less money than Mike was paying to print
Right.
Collectors Quarterly.
Right.
So plus, I said to Bob Enos, was his name, I said, "Who is that woman sitting at that desk that brought me in?" And, "Oh, that's Joanne. She's one of our account executives." And he goes, "Why do you ask?" I said, "Because I'm going to marry her."
Did
So
you?
yeah, I did. It didn't last very long, but it's a good story. And I've now been married 40 years to the love of my life, who worked in Major League Baseball and gave up her career so I could move
Mhm.
to Pittsburgh and be vice president of the Pirates. But anyway, so we started printing baseball quarterly color. It was great. They loved it, and it sold so well that they said, "Hey, listen, for 1978, we got to bump the print run up to 100,000." Now,
Wow.
now the cost per issue is 28,000, not 2,800. And Mike says, "That's it. I'm out. Have fun." So Mike retained 20% of the business, and I was now the editor and publisher. And the story about being the youngest is there was a gentleman that I would see in the press box at Yankee Stadium, because I'd go to at least one game of every series.
Mhm.
Met so many people. Oh my goodness gracious. The first game I got credentialed to was opening day of 1977. And they were
Wow.
celebrating the 50th anniversary of the
Sure.
1927 Yankees.
Right.
And 5 of the 7 living members came back and were introduced on the field. And when they came off the field and the game started, they went to the press room, the dining room, which was on the basement clubhouse level. So I kind of wandered in there rather than go sit in the press box and watch the first 3 innings of the game. I'm sitting with Joe Dugan, Bob
Wow.
Shalke, Wait Hoyt, and they're telling stories about the Babe. Hey, Joe, remember when the Babe threw the guy off the
Wow.
train? And I'm like, this is unbelievable. So there was a gentleman that was at every game. He covered the games for the wire service. His name was Bill Shannon.
Okay.
And Bill Shannon was a former PR executive. I know he was the head of PR for Madison Square Garden for a while. One of those great press box characters. Always wore
Mhm.
a suit. Didn't fit him, but he wore a suit. He always wore a suit to a game. I never saw Bill Shannon dressed casually. And he said, I can get you a lot of publicity because you're the story. And I went, how am I the story? He goes, you're the youngest editor and publisher of a national magazine in the country. I can get you on Good Morning America. I said, how do you know that I'm the youngest editor and publisher of a national magazine in the country? And he said, how old are you? I said, I'm 23. He goes, well, if you're not the youngest, then there'll be some really ticked off guy who's 22 years old and is the editor and publisher of a national magazine. All right, let's go with that. So these are the things that happened in the beginning, and Baseball Magazine lasted 5 years. I think the best thing that came out of that for me, other than meeting so many people, all the PR guys, players, whatever, I became friends with Reggie Jackson. Um, and
So
with
that happened before you were with the Yankees.
Oh yeah, it was 1977. In fact,
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you an interesting story about that. But I always said I did an interview with the local paper where the same place that printed Mike's Collectors Quarterly with a gentleman, and he said, "This is some undertaking." I said, "Well, at the very least, it's a really expensive resume because I didn't expect it to last a year. It lasted 5 years,
Right.
but I couldn't go on because we just couldn't get the ad revenue." It
Huh.
was very hard to get the ad revenue, and I'm facing the same challenge with a magazine 50 years later.
Sure.
But I there was a gentleman by the name of Keith Morris who was the PR person for Sports Illustrated, and he marketed that magazine. It was unbelievable. And every week, or when the Yankees were home, he'd walk around and he'd put copies of the magazine on players, chairs, and they were happy to get a Sports Illustrated, whatever. I
Sure.
never got one from him, by the way, but I decided when I'm a magazine editor, I'm going to replicate what Keith does. So I probably had 6 or 8 copies of the first issue, and I put one on Munson's chair, one on Reggie's chair. Well, I only had like 6. So after the game, I go in the clubhouse and I see Reggie talking to one of the Yankees PR people, and they're kind of looking at me, and the PR guy nods like yes, and Reggie waves me over. I'm like, oh boy. He goes, "You the guy that left that magazine on my chair?" And I'm thinking he's going to say, "Don't do that again."
Don't come near my chair. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
But he
yeah.
said, "That was really good. When am I going to be on the cover?" And I said, "Well, if you give us an interview next issue." He goes, "Yeah, whatever you need."
Huh.
So this happened before the conversation with Bill Shannon, where he said, "I can get you all this publicity." So when Bill had that conversation with me, maybe a month later or whatever, the second issue with Reggie had come out. So now it's kind of in the summer. Bill says, "Look, I can get you publicity, but we need to, publicity then was mailing out releases. It wasn't doing stuff online.
Right. Sure. This is a whole different
Online was
universe.
like
Yeah.
the telephone." So he said, "We need one thing though. I need a photo that you will mass produce and we'll put it in everything I mail out. And that photo has to be of you reading the magazine with the biggest name in baseball. And right now, that name is one Reginald Martinez Jackson." And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. You want me to get my picture taken with Reggie Jackson?" "Yes." "All right." So I
Olivia,
don't
do we
remember
have
when it
that?
was, but Reggie's at his locker. I went over.
I think that's it.
Yep. Well, that's the photo. So I went to his locker very sheepishly. He's on the cover, so I felt like I had some credits in the bank.
Uh-huh.
And I said, "This is what I'm doing. This is it," and I'm told that I need a picture with you. And he's not even listening. He's just getting dressed, and all of a sudden, without turning around, he says, "Batting practice tomorrow. You know,
Huh.
come get me." So I show up the next day with my photographer, Eddie Orsi, who was a firefighter, but he was also my photographer. Um, and I walk in and Reggie's getting dressed. And I said, Reggie, he goes, I'll be out at 10 minutes. I waited in the dugout. He came out and we did that picture.
How
Now,
about that?
Reggie and I kind of struck up a friendship, which really ticked off Thurman Munson. So
Sure.
a little later, we're doing a feature called How to Be a Major Leaguer, and we're getting all these major leaguers to give advice to kids to what they should be doing to make them. So I went over to Thurman and I
Uh-huh.
said, Thurman, I wonder if I can get a minute with you. I'm doing a story
I
on.
s I see where this is going,
Thurman
but
says,
go on.
Thurman says, why don't you go ask your buddy down there? I said, who's my buddy? And he said, number 44, you and him are pretty tight. I said, wait a second. I'm just trying to make a living here. I don't have any buddies in this clubhouse. And I start saying, and he starts laughing. And he says, I'm just, mucking with you or whatever.
Uh-huh.
What do you need? And he gave me the quote and everything. But I
We had a relationship with a gentleman named Ted Patterson, who was a broadcaster down in Baltimore. I don't know if you ever
I
met
know
him.
Ted Patterson very well.
Okay.
Yes.
Ted and I were talking one time, Ted was a broadcaster for the Orioles, I always love to ask him to tell me stories. And one of the questions that I asked him one time was, "Who is the nicest player? Who's the nicest guy that you encountered in the major leagues?" And his first, he said, "Besides Brooks Robinson and Bob Feller."
Yeah. Right.
And I said, "Yeah, besides Brooks Robinson and Bob Feller." And he said, "Reggie Jackson." And that just
Well,
blew me away.
it would
What a
blow
misunderstanding.
Reggie away too. I can tell you that
Yeah.
because, um, I, you know, so the end of the story is that I realized years later that that was a test. Munson was testing me to see what I was made of. Am I some guy that's going to fold up like a cheap card table? But I didn't. And we had a
Right.
great relationship. My mother loved him. He
Huh.
signed a beautiful photo to my mother for her birthday in 1977 that was so beautiful that when she passed, we auctioned it off with another auction house because you weren't around then. And it was when I saw it in the catalog, it said the most magnificent signed photo of Thurman Munson that exists.
Wow.
So he did. So I had a good relationship with Thurman. But the Reggie story is funny that um, we go to the World Series now, right? And
Uh-huh.
Reggie was feuding with Billy all year. They did not get along. So it's game 6. And in those days, Al, the team didn't come out on the field all at once and stretch and whatever. They came out in their batting practice groups of 3 or 4.
Okay.
So I think Reggie was in the last group. So I'm sitting in the dugout. This is game 6 of the 1977 World Series. The dugout
It's an
is
important game.
the dugout
Yeah.
is empty. There's not a soul in the dugout because down the first baseline, everybody's in a scrum around Billy Martin because the Yankees had just handed out press releases that they've signed him to an extension.
Okay.
So Reggie comes out, takes his bat out of the bat rack, gets his helmet, and looks around and says, "Hey, Rick, where is everybody?" He's expecting to come out to a crowd waiting for him.
Right.
I said,
Sure.
"You see that scrum down there? In the middle of that is Billy. The Yankees just announced that they're signing him to an extension, and that's the press conference." Reggie Jackson sits next to me, taps me on the leg, and says, "I guess you and I will have the rebuttal." And we both laughed. Well, a couple hours later, he had the rebuttal. All right, he had 3
Yeah, he
home
sure
runs in the
did.
World Series. So, Reggie, Reggie's a dear friend to this day. Um, he's, I remember one time in spring training, we went out to dinner and he brought a woman who he had met at the hotel. She was staying in the hotel and he says, "Hey, I'm going to dinner." And he tells me, he goes, "You'll like her. She's in PR." And I'm like, "Oh, I got to enter. All right. So whatever." So he brings this woman, very nice lady. And she says at one point, So I'm not a baseball fan, but when I told my friends back in New York that I was having dinner with you, they said, make sure you ask him how he got the name Mr. October. And Reggie doesn't stop eating. He doesn't look at her. He just starts answering. He goes, well, that's very simple. It's a good story. He says, when I was back as a player, I was pretty buff. I mean, I had a great body. He says. So one year, I don't remember what year it was. Do you, Rick? And I'm like, no. And he says, I was asked to pose nude for Playgirl magazine. And the month that I was in was October, and I was Mr. October. And the woman looks at me and says, see, if you don't ask, you'll never learn. And I'm like, oh my. And Reggie never smiled, never clued her in on the joke. So and
That's
if you're watching, if
outstanding.
that woman is watching,
But now she really knows.
yeah, now she knows. I'm sure she
So
knows. I'm sure she knows once she told that story to her friends in New York.
so at what point do you become the PR director of the Yankees?
Well, what I told my guidance counselor in 1969 took what 30 years.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was 20 years after I graduated and started. It was 1996. But before
Okay.
that, I when I closed the door on baseball magazine, I went right to work for the baseball commissioner's office as the assistant director of public relations under Bowie
Okay.
Kuhn. And then
Okay.
Peter Uberoth came in after the LA Olympics, for which he was named Time Magazine Man of the Year. And now I
Yeah,
work for Peter.
sure.
And Peter took a liking to me. I mean, to Bowie, and God bless him, rest in peace. I was, I was a nobody. I was the guy
Right.
that copied the box scores or whatever. But Peter saw something in me, and he gave me a promotion and this and that. But I came to realize that when Bowie came in, he got his own PR guy. When Peter came in, he brought in his own PR. I'm never going to be the PR guy. I'll
Right.
be lucky to survive. Now, it turns out, looking back, some things you think are not true. There's been a number of commissioners since uh, Peter Uberoth. There's been, Fay Vincent and Bart Giamatti and Bud Selig and Rob. Well, Pat Courtney, who came, may have replaced me. He's been there ever since. So my thinking wasn't uh, correct.
Right.
So
Sure.
what happened after the 86 World Series, I was getting a little frustrated at being the number two guy and with no chance in my mind of being number one. And a woman that I knew who was the promotions director for WNEW AM and FM, and she would come to
Mhm.
all the events. She calls me up and she says, when can we have lunch? I said, I don't know, Thursday, whatever. This is right after the Mets won the World Series. And
Okay.
and she said to me before she hung up, Rick, this lunch is going to change your life. And I'm like, well, you got my interest. So we had lunch. And she said to me at one point, she said these words, and how prophetic, Al, were these words. We at WNEW believe the future of AM radio is sports. Well,
Wow.
pretty prophetic. There's no all sports.
Yeah.
The only sports on radio regularly, talk shows, were Art Russ Jr. on WABC and Dave
Yep.
Sims on WNBC. They wanted to acquire as many because their audience was literally dying off. It was going
Mhm.
down because people didn't stop listening. They died.
Right.
The music was Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole, and the
Sure.
DJs were all in their 60s, and they were old, and William B. Williams and Ted Brown. So they wanted to acquire as many sports properties as they can. At the time, they had the Giants and Penn State football. But they
Okay.
tried to acquire, as they got the Major League Baseball package, which I was shocked. And they wanted a 3 hour a night show to anchor all their sports coverage to promote. Hey, tomorrow, the Nets are playing. Okay, and we want you to create a show for us. You got 3 hours of airtime. Make it different. Make it whatever. They said the only thing is we already have a host, and the host was Richard Neer, who's been on the air
Sure.
ever since.
Right,
I had
forever.
lunch with
Yeah.
Richard, and I'll never forget Richard taking a napkin at this restaurant we met at top of the sixes, and he says the show's got to be a circle, and he put these two. He made it into pieces like a pie, And he says, at the 20-minute mark, we have a sports update, sports and news update. At 40 minutes, we have a sports and news update. At the top of the hour, we have a sports and news update, which everybody at the station thought was the dumbest thing that was ever suggested. You're going to stop talking to give scores or news. Yes. Well, that's what's,
Yeah.
I think that's
You're right. Sure.
it
Yeah.
became a staple. And then right after we launched, the Giants were in the Super Bowl in Pasadena, and Richard couldn't go for some reason, so he anchored the show from the studio, and I went out to Pasadena, and they hired Dave Jennings, the former Giants punter who wanted to get into broadcasting, and indeed he did, to be with me in Anaheim. And now you hear about Radio Row at the Super Bowl. In 1987, it was Radio Corner. There was no Radio Row. Nobody from a non-participating team was sending a talk show. So we were there in one corner of the headquarters hotel for the Giants. We were in one corner, me and Dave Jennings, and in the other corner was Dave Sims. And we did this back and forth, and it was, it really went well. When I got back, the station manager, Mike Kakianis, said, look, I got to add to your role here. I don't have any more money for you, but you and Richard need to co-host this because you guys were great together. So I ended up being the executive producer and the co-host of the Sports Connection. So what happened was that in July, WHN, which was country music, announced that they were going 24 hours a day, all sports, 24 hours, which I thought two things. One, that has no chance to succeed. Okay, wrong again. But the second thing was it will succeed. It will last long enough to kill us. And it did in a matter of months. So at the same time, someone I worked with at the commissioner's office who went to the Pittsburgh Pirates for her first job as the centennial coordinator, because 1987 was the Pirates centennial celebration, said, hey, they fired their vice president of public relations. Your name keeps coming up. If you're interested, call so-and-so. So I told my wife, what do you think about moving to Pittsburgh? And we ended up moving to Pittsburgh. So I think her reaction was ultimately positive. She had, I think she was in Pittsburgh for the 79 World Series, and that was it. And so I got the job, and it wasn't easy because it was a really hellacious interview process, much harder than the Yankees was. But I interviewed for the Yankee job like 3 or 4 times over the. I mean, Mr. Steinbrenner went through from 1973 till he hired me. He had gone through a dozen PR men in 24 years.
Yeah,
they averaged like 2 a year. One guy, Harvey Green, lasted 3 years. And he was known as the Lou Gehrig of Yankee PR. So, but the Pirate interview was very intense with a number of people, different personalities. The general manager, Sid Thrift, a character. The president, Mac Prine. The head of business, Bernie Mullen. All different personalities. And somehow I got the job. And I will tell you this. I'm going to say this right now. I was there 6 years before they literally ran out of money. And it was the most fun I've ever had.
Really?
It was, and if you ran across anybody that played on the Pirates in those years, Andy Van Slyke, they'll say I never had more fun than I had in Pittsburgh. It was an amazing
That's pretty amazing
experience. But I didn't get the Yankee job until I left the Pirates. And I interviewed with one person. I got the job. I got home I drove from Pittsburgh and stayed at my parents' condo in Somers. And I went for the interview. I drove back, and my mother said, when do you think you'll hear from them? I think at that moment, the phone rang. Yeah. And it was David Sussman saying, can you get a tuxedo and come to the baseball writers' dinner on Sunday night? Because we'd like to introduce you. And there's me and the boss, who I loved. You hear a lot of things about George Steinbrenner, but he was, I'll tell you a thing about George Steinbrenner, how I succeeded with him.
That's one of my questions.
Well, back in 1977, and you showed the picture of me and Mr. Steinbrenner in his office, when they won their first world championship in 15 years, there it is. Look at me. Learned how to dress. I showed that picture to my son once. Well, with the Reggie picture, when I have the same hair, when my son was like 6, it was in my office, and I said, Corey, who's that with Reggie Jackson? He goes, I don't know, Dad. I know it's one of the Beatles. So that was a long time ago. But
So
okay.
so I don't want to cut you off, but we're talking about all of this time that you spent in the big leagues with Pittsburgh, and also obviously you were with the Yankees during the Yankees' big run. And I'm curious if you have any kind of behind the scenes stories about a player or about a thing that happened that you think most fans would never know that happened. Most fans would never guess
Oh
that.
boy.
I know you have a million
I
of
mean,
these
I
stories. I
probably
could,
have a million of them, but there's something with everybody
yeah,
behind the scenes. One of my favorite stories, and no one, I've written about this, but no one would know this, but when we had the attack of 9/11, we were getting calls all the time about, can you do this for this kid? And we never said no. And
right.
one day, the next year, so it would be 2002, I got a call from a gentleman who was telling me about a little girl named Kate Muscali, who was 9 years old. I think she was 8 on 9/11, but now she's 9. And
Okay.
her father was killed on 9/11, was murdered on 9/11. And
Right.
she's really having a tough time. She's not the same. So her favorite player is Derek Jeter. Do you think if she comes to a game, you can arrange for her to meet? And I know the answer is going to be yes. So
Sure.
I go to Derek, obviously, and Derek's like, "Come on, Rick, of course." And I remember the day they came with her family, her brother, her sister, and her mother, and this gentleman. We put him next to the dugout. And earlier in the day, when I first saw Derek, who people ask me all the time, "What was Derek Jeter like?" And the first thing I say is, "Well, he had no use for me." Wow, you didn't get along? No, we got along great. He just didn't need the services that I provided to the players.
Right.
I never saw him do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. And here's a perfect example. So I see Jeter, and before I could say, he says, "I know, Kate's day, Kate's day." Now, um, so he comes he comes out with the team, and he's stretching, and then we put them in place, and he's stretching on the field. And me being a good PR guy, I walk over and I'm standing over him, and I said, uh, Derek, don't look now, but the group behind the dugout, next to the dugout, the little girl with the blue windbreaker and the Yankee cap, that's Caitlin, because her name was Caitlin. And so when you're done, if you have, once you walk over, and this way she'll. Okay. I turn around and I'm walking back, and I hear from behind me, "Hey, Kate, get out here. You're late. Time to stretch." The next thing I know, this little girl's on the ground with a rubber band, with one of those elastic bands. And Jeter's calling players over. "Hey, Kate, this is Rogers. Kate, this is Mariano. Bernie, do you know Kate?" This and that. So,
Wow.
so anyway, they sat in the dugout, and I was kind of sitting within earshot, and they're talking. And he says to her, "So do you go to games?" And she just shuts down and says, "I used to go with my dad." And then she can't talk anymore. And Derek says, "Well, I want you, when you come to the game, I hope you'll come to more games because we need you. But I want you to do me a favor. Whenever uh, you come to a game, just tell Mr. Cerrone that you're coming. I don't know if I can see you every time, but I want to know that you're here." And you go, "Okay." So every couple of weeks, months, I'd get a call. "Hey, Mr. Cerrone, I'm coming to the game tonight. Tell Jeff Derek," and he'd see her a lot. And this went on and on for a year, at
Wow.
least the next 5 years. And now she's
That's
in high school.
unbelievable.
Now so that was the most amazing thing. And I asked her mother, I talked to her mom one time, and she said, "You know why Derek did that, right?" I said, "Why?" He goes, "Because he wanted to keep up, he wanted to check on her and make sure she's okay. And if he saw her, right, so he would know she's
Wow.
okay." And then one time, my her mother, Lori, said to me, I was saying about the impact that Derek had on this little girl. And she said, Rick, he changed her name. I said, what are you talking about? She says, well, when we called you, she was Caitlin. Now she's
Wow.
Kate. And I asked Kate, why did you change from Caitlin to Kate? And she goes, because that's what Derek calls me. So there's no more Caitlin or Katie, it's Kate. And
How
I was
about that?
honored to be at her wedding 3 years ago. And Derek sent flowers.
No kidding.
And that's something that no one really. I mean, I wrote about it in
No,
my,
no.
but
That's
there's
a
so many things
fantastic.
like that. There's so many things like Mr. Steinbrenner, and no one would know this. He would say he'd call me in his office. Oh, we're going out on the road, right? After the game, we're going to get on the bus. We're going to go to the plane. We're going to go to Chicago, Cleveland, wherever it was. So you never want to hear from Mr. Steinbrenner on getaway day, right?
Sure.
Because you stay here. You don't go. Send your assistant on the trip. So he calls me in his office and he says, yeah, listen, I met these two people outside the gate, a dad and his young man. Good thing they're going to go with you on the trip. They're going to travel with you to Chicago. So you make sure you take care of them. I'm like, okay. So we get on the plane and there's this guy and a kid that just went to the Yankee game. And now they're on the plane with the players. And I'll tell you one thing, and I think it was David Cohn, and if it was someone else, I apologize. When you get on the plane, David Zen would walk up and down the aisle giving you your meal money, which was an envelope at whatever amount it was per day times the number of days.
Right.
It could be $400, it could be 800, whatever. David Cohn, I believe, was the person that did this. He went to every player and said, 20 bucks, 20 bucks. I got an envelope and gave the kid, here's your meal money. So the kid
That
got
is
like
so
700.
cool.
He got more meal money than anybody on the plane. So
That's
that's just one of
amazing.
the things that Mr. Steinbrenner did that people don't know about. But I want to get back real quick, if I can, to that interview I did with him in 1977. It was a Q&A that I ripped off from Playboy magazine. And I asked him a question about his management style. Because
Uh-huh.
he was boisterous, and I said,
Sure.
and at some point in the answer, and I have this on tape. I didn't use this in the actual interview, but I have it on tape because that's the one thing that stayed with me when I walked out of the building that November evening. He was talking about his leadership style or management style, and he said, Rick, there are two types of leaders. Some men are Pattons and some are Eisenhowers. I'm a Patton. And by that, he meant, Patton was boisterous, had a big ego, vociferous. Uh, Eisenhower was more of an administrator.
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
Patton. So when I walked to that car, even though I'm the editor and publisher of a national baseball magazine, I wanted to be the PR director of the Yankees, even under George Steinbrenner. I said to myself, walking to my car, if you ever get this job, that's the way you're going to play it. He's General Patton, and you are a lowly corporal. So when I got the job 20 years after that, it was always sir. When I answered the phone, it was yes, sir. When I wanted to make a statement, I'd say, sir, if I may, sir. And it finally got to be, sir, I can't let you do that. Sir, are you out of your mind? Things like that. But he was General Patton. He was General
That's
Patton,
amazing.
and that served me well.
So Rick, I had a list of questions for you, and I asked one of them, and, and I could have you on so many times, and we're gonna have to have you on again.
I'll be
But
I'll be
but
here
we're
for you,
we're
Al.
we're close to the end, and I want to talk about Baseball
Yeah.
Digest a little bit. This year, Love of the Game became a sponsor of Baseball Digest, and I'm thrilled about that because it's a magazine that I read when I was a kid, and it's been very dear to me, and it was instrumental in making me the baseball fan that I am today, and also teaching me about history
Right.
of baseball. And now you are the editor in chief of Baseball Digest. So I'm hoping you can give us the quick elevator speech on what you're trying to do with the magazine, and then maybe we could talk about the awards a little bit.
Well, thank you. I would love to do that. And I also, and this is a true story, if my high school guidance counselor had said, boy, that's a real tall order, PR director of the Yankees, whatever. What's your second choice? I really would have said I'm the editor of Baseball Digest. So how
Okay.
lucky am I that I got to do both of them?
Both jobs. Yeah.
But I took over a magazine in a very difficult period, challenging period for print publication
For print.
in
Sure.
2018, and I felt like it was a depressed property. That it didn't, what I did when I had Baseball Quarterly and Baseball Magazine to get publicity, to get the name out there, I had to create awards. And of course, we
Right.
created players of the year for each league, but we made them different by having the managers vote on them. We
Hmm.
created a player of the decade, which
Right.
we'll save it for another time. But our player of the decade award that we gave out in February of 1980 turned into the biggest sports story of the year. Well, we got knocked off the back pages or whatever by the U.S. men's hockey team, but it was the biggest story for a couple of days, a week. But we'll get into that
Yeah.
another time. But I created awards, and I created a
Right.
Lifetime Achievement Award, and Baseball Digest was giving out awards, but was doing no more than putting it in the issue. They weren't putting out a
Right.
press release. They didn't give an award. So the first thing I said that we have to do to the publisher, Norman Jacobs, we got to monetize the awards for publicity purposes, for engagement with players, and for revenue.
Sure.
So we created beautiful crystal mementos. We announce it on MLB Network. So we get a lot of publicity. But then we created the Lifetime Achievement Award 5 years ago. And I'm going to be
Right.
honest with you, Al. We held out. We had companies that wanted to sponsor this. But the only name that could go on I can't give a Lifetime Achievement Award sponsored by Jersey Mike's to Willie Mays. The Baseball Digest,
Right.
Jersey Mike's, or whatever. It had to be somebody that loved the game, that was an integral part of the game. Well, and then Love of the Game Auctions came along, and we said, perfect, this is our partner. So we've done it for 5 years now. The May issue, which will come out in a couple of weeks, May 1st, will be the 6th annual Lifetime Achievement Award. I can assure you it is a very deserving person who spent his life in or around Major League Baseball. Our winners have been Willie Mays, Vin Scully, Joe Torre, Dusty Baker, and Bob Costas.
That's
And
a pretty solid list.
all of them were incredibly grateful to win it. Vin Scully called me. I don't know he had my number. I'm driving along in Pittsburgh. We were visiting Pittsburgh where we wanted to move, and we since have. This phone comes up from a California area code, and I answer the phone. Rick, good afternoon. I thought I was listening to the radio.
You sound like him.
And he's going on to win this award is Bob. I'm like, holy. Willie Mays said it was the nicest trophy he ever got.
How about that?
So, and I know the others feel the same way. So we're really looking forward to doing it again this year for the 6th year. We're gearing up for the big reveal on MLB Network and through the AP and MLB.com. But I can't.
And that reveal is going to be May 1st,
Well,
right?
probably the week before. It'll be the last
Okay.
week in April, the week that starts the 20th of April.
And that will be the Love of the Game Auctions Baseball Digest Lifetime Achievement
Well, let's
Award.
for now
Yes?
keep it the other way around.
Okay. We can do that, I guess. But we're thrilled to be involved, and it's going to be really cool to be a part of that. Again, this is a publication that's been, integral to my life and to my development as a fan, and it is really neat to have my company name involved with such a cool venture. So thank you for that opportunity, and I can't wait to see who it's going to be. You can stick around, you can watch social media, and you can also subscribe to Baseball Digest.
Well, I just want your viewers to know you're the co-sponsor, Al. You know who it is.
I do.
You're not going to tell them. Anyone? Wow, he doesn't even tell the co-sponsor. Anyway,
one more question.
Yeah.
We close up every episode of the program with this same question, so I'm going to ask it to you as well. What was the thing? What was the event that caused you to fall in love with the game?
The voice of Bob Shepard. So it's the
Wow.
PA announcer at Yankee Stadium who came to be known as the voice of God.
Voice of
But
God. Yeah.
this is 1963, 62, 60, when I went to my first game at Yankee Stadium, sat in the upper deck with either the Cub Scouts or the Little League, and I hear, good afternoon, like,
Oh,
holy cow, I never heard a PA
yeah.
announcer. And and then I would hear him all the time. And um, when I was in high school, if there was an opportunity to be the PA announcer, I would jump at it, whether it was wrestling, warming up on mat one, and I was
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
Bob Shepard. So now I'm the PR director of the Yankees, and Bob had been a dear friend since the first day I was in that press room in 1977. And the scoreboard operator calls me in my spot and says, "Hey, you got to step in for Shep. He can't. He's got laryngitis." It's like the third inning of a Friday night game.
Did you get to do
So
that?
yeah, so he says, "But do it as Shepard."
No.
Yeah, so I went in. And I go, you know, I did the whole thing. Now he says, "You're going to have to do this. Plan to do it tomorrow because there's no way he's going to recover overnight." So I leave for the ballpark on Saturday. It's a national TV game on Fox, or Joe Buck is doing the game. And what happens? I get a flat tire on the way.
Oh,
So so I do the game, and I'm like, and Bob Shepard was there with me. He just couldn't talk, but
right.
we had lost a great Yankee Gene Woodling. So Bob
Sure.
is writing one of his beautiful, you know, memorials and I had to
Right.
read it. "Ladies and gentlemen, would you please rise? Earlier this week, Gene Woodling, and so I had people after the game. I go in the clubhouse, like Scott Brocious comes over to me and says, Who was that in the booth? Because it wasn't." And I said, "How do you know it wasn't Shepard?" He goes, "Because he said Brocious without spitting." Because Bob had he was older. He's 95 years old or whatever. So, and I said, "Well, it was me." And Mattingly goes, "No way, it was you." I said, "Yes, Don, it was me." And it was great. So I got to do 4 games. It was another year where Bob couldn't make it, and his backup couldn't either. So I got to do, and they actually showed me on the Fox broadcast in the booth doing Bob Shepard.
That's
So
fantastic.
Bob Shepard, that voice got me saying, "This must be pretty important."
Sure.
So anyway,
Sure. That's a great, great story. Full of great stories. This whole episode has been full of great stories. I really appreciate you coming on with us. We definitely have to have you back.
happy to do it, Al.
We didn't even scratch the surface of these questions and your career. So I would love to go
You're
over
saying
some
I
of that.
talk too much, so
No, 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 no. It was engaging. It was great, and I really appreciate you spending so much time with us today.
happy to do it.
So excellent. Well, thanks so much, and thanks everybody for joining us.